Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 219, The Count, Part 1. Arthur Weiler was born in 1861 in Austria. He came out to Australia in 1881 as the representative of a foreign nation to the Melbourne International Exhibition. He made many friends in the Victorian capital and was a well-known figure in society. He was admitted to the leading clubs and attended functions at Government House. At the conclusion of the exhibition, he stayed in Melbourne for some time, but becoming short of money, he commenced swindling society women. In divorce information his wife gave, he told her he was born in 1859 in Switzerland. His Victorian jail record has his birth date as also 1859, but it stated he was born in Hamburg, Germany, and was a silk mercer and was Jewish. This record says he came out to Australia on the Zealandia in 1880 as a free man. But on his New South Wales jail record, he stated he was born in Switzerland in 1860 and arrived on the Zealandia in 1882. He stated he was Jewish and was an agent or a clerk. I did find a record on the Zealandia where it had come from the port of Auckland to Sydney on the 25th of August 1882, and there is a Mr. Weiler that was a passenger in steerage, so it's quite likely that that was his way of coming into the country. I was able to establish at least 25 aliases for this man. The first record that I have of Arthur Weiler was on the 4th of September 1880 in the Christchurch Star in New Zealand. A hopeful youth. At the City Police Court, Alexander Weiler, a young man, was charged with obtaining money by false pretences and remanded. The police stated that the accused's career was just being unravelled. He'd been swindling people right and left in Dunedin by issuing cheques and representing that remittances were coming to him from home to a very large amount. It appears that the whole story was a falsehood from beginning to end. And 5 days later, in the Evening Star on the 9th of September 1880, false pretences. Alexander Weiler was charged with on the 14th of August unlawfully and knowingly by certain false pretences obtained from one John Watson the sum of £6 with the intent to cheat and defraud him of the same. John Watson was a licensed victualler carrying on business in High Street, and he deposed that he knew the accused. The cheque produced he recognised, and it was drawn on the Bank of New South Wales for £6 signed A. Weiler. I received it from the accused on the 14th of August. He came to me and asked me if I would cash this cheque for him, which I refused. He came again and I refused again. He then called a third time and I refused then. On the last occasion, he said, "You needn't be frightened, Mr. Watson, the cheque will be met all right," or words to that effect, and making some reference to a letter which he had from Christchurch, stated that some money was in credit at the bank. On those representations, I cashed the cheque for him and gave him 6 £1 notes. I placed the cheque to my banking account and it was returned to me dishonoured. I had known the accused for 4 months from seeing him about the place. He was not in the habit of spending money freely. The reason I did not cash the cheque at first was that I had heard from other tradesmen concerning him. What he told me led me to believe that there was more than sufficient money at the bank to meet his cheque. Subsequently, he told me that his letter from Christchurch had led him astray. Frederick Smith, in the employ of Kirkpatrick, Glendinning and Company, deposed that he cashed a cheque for £15 for the accused on 26th of July. It was dishonoured, and the accused was acquainted of the fact on the 28th of July. The cheque was on the Bank of New South Wales. We'd made clothes for the accused, who was a casual customer, but we have not been paid for them. I had previously cashed a cheque for him, which was met. George William Hatfield, a ledger keeper for the Bank of New South Wales at Dunedin, recognised the cheque produced. It was presented for payment on the 16th of August and dishonoured. Robert Crowe, a clerk at the Union Steam Shipping Company's office, stated that on the 30th of August the accused took out a passage ticket for Melbourne from the Bluff, paying the fare the next day, and gave the name A. Werner. J. Riedel, the manager of a branch for Guthrie and Israch, deposed that he saw the accused on the 2nd on the platform of one of the carriages on the Invercargill train. He told the witness he was going to Milton. The witness was a victim of the accused. Detective Bain arrested the accused on the 2nd. On searching him, he found a ticket for Melbourne now produced, also 3 cheques, one for £5 and 2 for £6 each, on the Bank of New South Wales, filled up and signed by the accused. The prisoner was committed for trial. The prisoner was then further charged with obtaining £15 from Kirkpatrick, Glendinning and Company with intent to defraud. The prisoner was also committed for trial, and bail was fixed in each case at the prisoner's recognizance for £100 and 2 sureties for £50 each. And in the Evening Star on the 9th of September 1880, the prisoner Alexander Weiler was committed at this morning's sitting of the City Police Court to take his trial on 2 charges of obtaining money under false pretences. After slighting from the conveyance and when at the bottom of the steps to the entrance to the jail, he made a sudden dart and, passing the constable in whose charge he was, ran down Stewart Street at the top of his speed and through Finlay and Company's timber yard into Cumberland Street. He then entered the brewery yard adjoining, scaled its wall and got into Finlay's yard again and secreted himself under logs of timber. Warder Morrison could have stopped Weiler at first, but being on the gate, he was unable to leave his post until he handed over the keys to someone. The governor happened to be the first to answer his alarm, and that done, he joined the constable in the pursuit of Weiler, whom they soon unearthed from his hiding place. He was brought back to jail looking very crestfallen. Although the escape, pursuit and capture did not last more than 3 or 4 minutes, the unusual occurrence caused a considerable crowd to collect at the jail gate to see Weiler taken back to his quarters. And on the 28th of September 1880 in the Otago Daily Times, Alexander Weiler, obtaining money by false pretences at Dunedin, 2 charges. In the Christchurch Star, it said that Alexander Weiler was called on and the prisoner reiterated that he was in the receipt of money from home. Mr. Watt adjourned the case until the 11th of October to enable him to prove that. On the 11th of October 1880 in the Evening Star, Alexander Weiler, who it will be remembered was charged with having obtained by false pretences £5 from J.W. Shackleton and remanded until today to enable him to produce evidence to show that he received remittances from home, was accordingly brought up again today. The evidence was not forthcoming and he was sentenced to 3 months' imprisonment with hard labour, in addition to his previous sentence. Once he completed his jail term in New Zealand, it seems that he went to Victoria. It stated that he was jailed in Victoria for 2 months on the 5th of April 1882, then another 2 months on the 27th of July 1882, for 3 months on the 3rd of October 1882, and for 3 months hard labour on the 26th of November 1883, all for false pretences. In the Sydney Daily Telegraph on the 30th of July 1884, passing valueless cheques. Yesterday, a respectable-looking man named Alexander Weiler was charged before the Water Police Court with having, by means of valueless cheques, obtained £2 and 10 shillings from Mr. John Johnson, proprietor of the Sydney and Melbourne Palace Hotel, and £4 10 shillings from Mr. Gilbert Jewell, manager of Aaron's Exchange Hotel. In the first instance, the circumstances were that the prisoner was staying at the Sydney and Melbourne Palace Hotel and during the month of June presented a cheque for £2 10 shillings in the London Chartered Bank of Australia to Mr. George Foster, manager for Mr. Johnson, and asked him to deduct sufficient to pay for 2 weeks' lodging. This he did, and he gave the prisoner 26 shillings as the difference. Subsequently, the prisoner requested to him to hold the cheque over for a few days, but he handed it to Mr. Johnson, who presented it at the bank, and it was dishonoured. He was sentenced to 3 months' imprisonment. In the second case, the prisoner went to Mr. Jewell at Aaron's Hotel on the 12th and requested him to cash a cheque for £4 10 shillings on the English, Scottish and Australian Chartered Bank. At first he objected, but as the prisoner mentioned good references, he cashed it. Subsequently, when he presented at the bank, the cheque was dishonoured. In this instance, also, the prisoner endeavoured to obtain a delay, with the view that he stated of repaying the amount. He was sentenced to imprisonment for 6 months. The sentences in both cases were ordered to be cumulative, and he served time in Darlinghurst Jail for those offences. On the 6th of October 1885, Alexander Weiler, alias the Count de Valesco, appeared in court today charged with obtaining money by means of valueless cheques and false pretences in Sydney, and he was remanded pending extradition. In the New Zealand Evening Star on the 13th of October 1885, Alexander Weiler, alias Count de Valesco, was charged at the Melbourne Police Court on the 5th with obtaining money by means of alias cheques in New South Wales. It is alleged that he had a confederate named Horton who would send him telegrams like the following: "I have banked £666, 17 shillings and 2 pence to your credit in the bank at Wangaratta." And then a few days later a telegram would be sent stating, "Could not draw money in consequence of losing interest. You must manage for a few weeks." It's also alleged that the pseudo-count had won the affections of a respectable girl in Beechworth who possessed a sum of £800, and they were to come down to Melbourne to be married, and after the honeymoon to start business in a hotel on the supposed capital of the Count, who proposed to borrow £100 from his fiancée to meet a temporary difficulty and defray the expenses of a honeymoon tour. This proposal excited the suspicions of the girl and her friends, and the match was broken off. The prisoner is said to have victimised a number of tradesmen and moneylenders in Sydney and elsewhere. And in the New South Wales Police Gazette on the 14th of October 1885, Alexander Weiler, alias Count de Velasco, charged on warrant with fraudulently obtaining goods and money to the amount of £2 and 10 shillings from Charles Edward Wigsell, having been arrested by Detective Greaves and remanded. And on the 23rd of October 1885 in the Sydney Evening News, the Count again. Alexander Weiler, alias Count de Velasco, who was recently sentenced to various terms of imprisonment, was further charged with having obtained the sum of £16 from Mary Cooper with intent to defraud. The Count represented to this woman that he could sell her tobacconist shop and business for £50. The woman was so far satisfied with the bona fides of the accused that she advanced him £16 on account. He was sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment with hard labour. This makes a term of 2 years that Weiler has to serve on convictions obtained against him during the last fortnight. So as a result, he was jailed in New South Wales on 3 counts of false pretences, with 6 months' jail on each charge. Then on the 9th of August 1887, in Victoria, illegally at large, a well-known criminal, Arthur Otto, alias Weiler, was arrested this afternoon on charges of stealing and with being illegally at large in the colony. He was a notorious criminal and was apprehended yesterday at the Metropolitan Hotel in Victoria Street, where he was found concealed underneath some clothes in a bedroom. He arrived recently from New South Wales after undergoing a sentence in that colony. The warrant for his arrest charges him with stealing £8 from Isaiah Marshall. He'll be brought up in the City Court this morning. And the next day, an additional charge has been entered into with the man Arthur Otto, alias Weiler, who was arrested on Monday for being illegally at large in Victoria. He's been recognised as the person who obtained a quantity of clothing from Haig Brothers Tailors in Collins Street, in payment for which he gave a cheque for £20 on the Union Bank of Sydney. He gave his address as Scott's Hotel, but it was found he was not known there. A man called and got the clothing on presenting an order from Weiler. This man, who gives the name of Otto Ernest Belmont, was yesterday arrested at the Metropolitan Hotel. 3 charges would be preferred against him. He'd been a fortnight in Melbourne and he was sentenced in New South Wales for 2 years as Alexander Weiler, and as a convict from that colony he was illegally at large here. He was remanded in custody for a week. And then in divorce papers from his wife, she said that she was informed by Detective Sergeant Corsi of Melbourne that the respondent, under the name of Arthur Otto, was convicted at the Court of General Sessions at Melbourne on the 1st of September 1887 on charges of false pretences and was sentenced to 9 months' imprisonment, and then a further charge of false pretences was sentenced to another 9 months' imprisonment concurrent on the first mentioned term. He was released from Pentridge on the 27th of April 1888. By the 22nd of August 1888 he's in Silverton, New South Wales, near Broken Hill. A warrant's been issued at the Silverton bench for the arrest of Arthur Attry, a foreigner, charged with obtaining the sum of £97 from Henry Hamlin of Silverton by means of a valueless cheque. He's 5'7" high, his age is not stated, medium build, fair complexion, light moustache, prominent nose, light brown hair, very flat feet broad at instep, dressed in dark tweed trousers, a black walking coat and a hard black felt hat, was travelling at the time for the Mutual Assurance Society of Victoria and is supposed to have gone to Adelaide. Arthur Weiler married Edith Sarah Millard on the 1st of November 1888 in Fitzroy, Victoria, at the Free Church of England under the name Arthur Alfred de Cass. Edith had been born on the 18th of February 1869 in Adelaide and was 4 years younger than Arthur. In their divorce record, it says that I'm unable to state what his means of livelihood were before our marriage. He informed me he was possessed of an independent income. But since my marriage, I have learnt that he has been frequently convicted of crimes. Immediately after the marriage, we lived in St Kilda and Malvern, and on the first day of February 1889, we proceeded on a temporary visit to New South Wales and lived together until the 22nd of February 1889, when he was arrested on warrant in connection with crimes. When arrested, he totally left me without means and unprovided for, and my fare was paid for by a relative in Sydney. I returned to Melbourne by train, and I have not seen him since the month of March 1889, when I saw him in Melbourne jail. During my cohabitation with him in Victoria, he pawned almost all my clothes and frequently remained absent from the residence all night without cause. Within 5 years of the date of our marriage, he has undergone frequent convictions for crime and has been sentenced in the aggregate to imprisonment for 3 years and upwards, and has left me without means of support. On the 2nd of March 1889, in the Hobart Mercury, court again. Arthur Crossy, alias Count Crossy, alias Alexander Weiler, alias Count de Valessis, alias Alfred Arthur Cass, an individual who succeeded in swindling people in Hobart some time ago, has gone into the hands of the Sydney Police. It will be remembered that he paid Hobart a visit in August last year, and it is thought that when he arrived here he was without money. This did not deter him from putting himself up at the Orient Hotel, and within a few days he obtained a quantity of clothes from a leading clothier, amounting to £40, which at a later period he bartered to another tradesman for £30. After spending a couple of months here, he eloped with the daughter of a clergyman, and upon arrival in Melbourne managed to get the young lady away from her relatives there, who were doing their utmost to prevent a union. He is said to have married the lady in question, and would appear he succeeded in working other swindles in Melbourne. The entry in the Gazette gives his name as Alfred Arthur Cass, and it states that he was charged on warrant with stealing £50 worth of furniture from Elizabeth Brown in Windsor on the 25th of January. The complainant stated that he is the person who is figured in the papers about last cup time in connection with an elopement in Tasmania. The photo of Alexander Weiler, convicted in New South Wales, has been identified by the complainant as that of the offender. He rented a furnished house with the complainant and stole away all the furniture, a portion of which he sold to Mr. Rowe, a furniture dealer in Malvern Road. His name appears on the Sydney Police records as Alexander Weiler as far back as 1884, he having up to that time served several sentences. Superintendent Pedder of this city, who's been endeavouring to ascertain his whereabouts, telegraphed his description to the police authorities there, and the adventurer is now placed in a position which will probably prevent him causing loss to other people for some time to come. And a week later, in the Tasmanian, a Launceston paper, it will be in the recollections of many that during the months of August to October last, in Hobart, we were honoured with the visit of a person who represented himself as a Swiss count. During his time here, he took hold of both the gentle and stern sex. He persuaded one of the former to elope with him and victimised several of the latter, bank managers, jewellers and clothiers. The manner in which he perpetrated one swindle was rather ingenious. He obtained from one of the leading clothiers £40 worth of clothes. While dining at the Orient, he induced a jeweller to lend him £30 on the security of the clothes he obtained. The money was paid over, and the confiding jeweller saw his friend off by the train. On going to get the clothes, he found the trunk in which they were supposed to be to contain an old tennis bat, a comb and a brush. As they arranged to meet in Melbourne at the Melbourne Cup, the victim said nothing about it at the time, but resolved to give the Count in charge when he arrived at the Victorian capital. On arriving there, he could find no trace of him, and endeavouring to do so, spent some 8 or 9 guineas, but it resulted in total failure. On returning to Hobart, the person victimised, Mr. Golding, gave information to the police, and on the 9th of January a warrant was issued for the arrest of Arthur Crossy, alias Count Crossy, alias Alexander Weiler, alias Count de Valessis, alias Arthur Edward Cass, for obtaining money from William Golding by means of false pretences. A lookout was kept for him, but somehow he managed to escape the vigilance of the Victorian police. A short time back, a Tasmanian lady in Sydney wrote to Mr. Pedder saying that she thought she'd seen Crossy, and the superintendent communicated with the Sydney police. It is probable that as the most serious charges are to be preferred against Crossy here, he'll be remanded from Sydney to Melbourne and thence to Hobart. And 4 days later, in the New South Wales Police Gazette, Alfred A. Cass, alias Alexander Weiler, alias Count de Velasco, charged on warrant with stealing furniture valued at £50, the property of Annie Brown of Windsor, Victoria, has been arrested and remanded to Melbourne. And again in the divorce papers with information from his wife, she said, from information given to her by Detective Sergeant Corsi, it is believed that the respondent was under the name of Alfred Arthur Cass and was convicted at the Court of Petty Sessions at Prahran in Victoria on the 14th of March 1889 on a charge of larceny and on 2 separate charges of false pretences, and was sentenced on 3 charges to 6 months imprisonment. 2 days later, he was also charged on false pretences and sentenced to a further 6 months imprisonment. He used the name Donald Simmons at this time, and he pled guilty to having obtained goods and money by false pretences on a cheque drawn by himself on the Colonial Bank of Australia at St Kilda for £10 on the 27th of December, knowing the cheque would not be paid, and he was remanded for sentence. So on the 1st of April 1889, on a further charge of false pretences, he was sentenced to another 6 months imprisonment. And on the 7th day of June 1889 was also charged with false pretences and was sentenced to another 6 months imprisonment. And that last sentence was outlined in the Melbourne Argus on the 8th of June 1889. Obtaining money by a valueless cheque. Donald Simmons, alias Cass, was charged at the St Kilda Police Court on Friday for obtaining money and goods by false pretences from E. Peters of St Kilda. The prisoner chose shoes at his shop to the value of 28 shillings. Payment was offered by cheque on the Colonial Bank for £3.10, signed D. Simmons. The witness was at first unwilling to receive the cheque, but the prisoner represented that he was in the employ of the Colonial Bank in that street and gave him the balance of the cheque of £2 2 in cash. The cheque on presentation was found to be valueless, and no such name was known at the bank. The witness subsequently received a letter in which the prisoner promised, on his word of honour, that he would repay the amount in a short time if no proceedings were taken against him. Detective O'Donnell stated that the prisoner was now under sentence of 18 months for similar offences. He was known to the police as a swindler 6 or 7 years ago and has proven to have been convicted in New South Wales. There were many more charges of a similar nature against the prisoner still pending. He'd been convicted at Prahran and other places on 3 separate charges and sentenced to 6 months on each. His marriage to the daughter of a clergyman in Tasmania would be remembered by the bench. The prisoner made a statement to the effect that he was expecting a remittance of 12,000 francs from Switzerland, and he'd drawn a number of cheques, fully expecting to meet them. He did not drink, but admitted in the matter of gambling, and that he had no control over himself. As an officer in the Austrian army, he had been ruined by gambling. For the sake of his wife, who was only 19 years of age, to whom he was married in October, he pleaded hard that the sentence that he was about to receive might be concurrent with those that he was now serving. The bench ordered him to be in prison for 6 months cumulative on his previous sentences. In the divorce papers in 1892, it stated that a son was born, Douglas Grantham Page de Cass, and he was born in Geelong on the 12th of September 1889, and he was in the custody of his mother. On the 14th of October 1890, in the Sydney Australian Star, a bogus count in Melbourne, Edward Cass, who a few years ago was a pet in the inner circles of Melbourne society as Count de la Nasca, has been again arrested for obtaining £90 by false pretences. The prisoner had only been a few hours discharged from Pentridge after serving 2 years for a similar offence. And in the divorce papers, his wife says that she believed that he was discharged from Pentridge on the 14th of October 1890. He was then rearrested and remanded in Silverton in New South Wales, and that was under the name of Arthur Attry. He was convicted at Silverton on the 4th day of December 1890 on a charge of false pretences and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment with hard labour at the Hay Jail. She also stated that she was not aware until after they had been married that he had been charged with crimes. On the 27th of August 1892, he appears in South Australia. In the Adelaide South Australian Chronicle, a clever swindler, Jim the Penman. One of the cleverest swindlers that has visited Australia appeared at the Adelaide Police Court on Monday morning with 8 separate charges of obtaining money from tradespeople in the city by false pretences. He gave his name as Richard Beecher, but the information laid against him contained such high-sounding aliases as Count de Velasco, de Paulo, and Cassi, Crossi, Weiler, and Atri. The defendant is said to be Swiss by birth, an accomplished linguist, and speaks 5 tongues. He's a man of good address and gentlemanly deportment. He was convicted in Victoria for the first time in 1882. Beecher has enjoyed little liberty since then. After serving 2 months hard labour in a Melbourne prison from April to June in 1882 for false pretences, he was again before the court in the July of the same year and received 2 months hard labour for a similar offence. His other convictions in Victoria were in October 1882 for false pretences, 3 months hard labour, November 1883 for false pretences with 3 months hard labour, September 1887 on 2 charges of conspiring to defraud, 9 months hard labour, in March 1889 on 3 charges of larceny and false pretences, 6 months imprisonment, in June 1889 for false pretences, 6 months imprisonment. His history in Sydney may be summarised as: in July 1884, 2 charges of false pretences with 9 months hard labour. In October 1885, 4 charges of false pretences, 6 months imprisonment on each, cumulative. Beecher also figures conspicuously in Broken Hill, and in December 1890 he got 2 years hard labour for false pretences. He arrived in Adelaide a couple of weeks ago by the Melbourne Express on the 13th of August and began to victimise the business people by walking into the shops and purchasing articles of clothing and jewellery and tendering cheques in payment. His appearance was so deceptive that those who had the misfortune to transact business with him readily took the cheques, asking only the usual question, "Is it all right?" The cheques were all dishonoured at the banks in which they were drawn. Mr. J.H. Mellabone, a portmanteau maker, took out a warrant for the arrest of the prisoner on Monday week, and the matter was placed in the hands of Detective Lawton and Kitson. In a few hours they traced the prisoner, who had taken his departure by the Broken Hill Express. They wired Sub-Inspector Saunders, and Beecher was placed under arrest and kept in custody until Detective Lawton reached the hill from Adelaide. The articles the prisoner was charged with obtaining by false pretences were found in his possession. On all the charges, the prisoner reserved his defence and was committed for trial. According to statements of the detectives, Beecher was wanted by them in 1889 on charges of swindling. When he came to Adelaide in that year, he stayed at the Rundle Street Hotel under the name of Cass. He discovered by an advertisement that a life insurance company wanted a canvasser. He applied for the position and, being an excellent linguist and possessing other qualifications, was immediately engaged. He received some money in advance and was dispatched to Broken Hill in the interests of the company. At Silverton, it stated that he got at a hotel keeper for £90 and swindled the company to the extent of £30. After doing this, he returned to Adelaide, engaged a trap to drive him to Eldgate, but instead of stopping there, drove on to the Mount Barker Junction and got away to Melbourne by the express. From Melbourne he went to Tasmania, where he was involved in a social scandal. The Melbourne newspapers then described him as a clever swindler, carrying on his nefarious practices under the name of Alfred Cass, a Swiss by birth and a man of ability. He succeeded in getting into good society in Hobart and won the affections of the daughter of a clergyman in that city, whom he induced to follow him to Paran. The two were married and lived in style until Cass one day sold all the furniture, representing that it was his own, and decamped to Sydney. He was then arrested and brought back to Melbourne on charges of false pretences, on which he was sentenced to 12 months imprisonment. In Sydney, Cass was known as Jim the Penman. So on the 5th of October 1892, in Adelaide, the criminal sittings Richard Beecher for obtaining money by false pretences received 3 years jail hard labour. And while he was in jail in South Australia, in the divorce court, Edith de Cass petitioned for divorce from Alfred de Cass. The petitioner was married in 1888 by N. Kinsman when she was 19 years old without the consent of her parents, her husband having represented himself as an Austrian count. Detective Causey proved that the man was a habitual criminal. The defendant failed to appear and left his wife penniless, and the divorce was granted. Then on the 7th of January 1895 in the Melbourne Herald, looking for a loan and finding a detective, alleged false pretences. This morning, a stylishly dressed Swiss, 35 years of age, named Arthur Otto Weiler, alias de Cass, alias Count de Velasco, popped into a pawn office in South Melbourne for the purpose of negotiating a small loan. At that time, Detective Causey was in the shop, and in the stylish foreigner he recognised the man for whose arrest a warrant had been taken out by Mr. John Hutchinson of Little Collins Street on a charge of obtaining a writing desk, an album and other articles valued at £4 9 shillings and 6 by false pretences. In payment for these a cheque was given, and it was pronounced by the bank as valueless. Weiler will be brought before the City Court tomorrow. And on the 19th of January 1895 in the Wagga Wagga Advertiser, a bogus count in court, 2 years imprisonment for imposition. Arthur A. Weiler, known amongst numerous other aliases, was brought before the City Court on Wednesday on 3 charges of false pretences, the victims being John Hutchinson, Frederick Howard and Andrew Drummond. John Hutchinson, carrying on business in Little Collins Street, deposed that on Christmas Eve the prisoner called at his shop and made purchases to the value of £4 9 shillings and 6 and alleged that he was a wealthy mine owner from Coolgardie. He tendered a cheque which was accepted, but the next day it was returned from the bank marked no account. Frederick Howard, an outfitter of Elizabeth Street, said the prisoner called at his place of business on the same date and obtained goods worth £3 13 shillings and 9 for which he gave a valueless cheque. Andrew Drummond, a jeweller of Collins Street, stated that the accused represented himself as a recent arrival from Broken Hill and purchased articles of jewellery valued at £51. He produced a duplicate pay-in slip from the Bank of Australasia, signed by the bank's official and bearing the bank's stamp as a guarantee, and upon this Mr. Drummond accepted the cheque for the amount. The next day the bank clerk was seen, and it was elicited that the account was opened by the accused's own cheque on the Broken Hill branch, and the cheque had not been cleared. A telegram was sent to Broken Hill on Mr. Drummond's suggestion, and it was discovered that Weiler was not known there. The police were then communicated with. Prisoner was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment with hard labour on each of the first 2 charges and 12 months imprisonment with hard labour on the third, sentences to be cumulative. The prisoner then made a statement in which he stated that his brother, who held a good position in Europe, had written to him since his arrest offering to send him some money and to pay his passage home. As soon as his sentence expired, he would at once leave the country, as he had come into some money, and as directly the first draft arrived from his brother, he would reimburse any persons who were out of pocket owing to his frauds. He asked the sentences might be made concurrent. Mr. Panton said that he could not accede to Weiler's request, but advised him to make restitution when the money arrived and then lay his case before the visiting justices. In part 2, I'll continue to outline Arthur Weiler's misdemeanours, and yes, there's still a long line of them. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.